We'd like to thank Mainspring Companies for sponsoring Season 1 of The Next Entrepreneur. Mainspring celebrates the entrepreneurial journey, and we are very grateful for their support.
The biggest curse that we have in investing is we always want to say, this time is different. And so there are probably some people listening to this right now thinking about the coronavirus. This time is different. The world's going to end. Well, the coronavirus is novel. It's new in our experience as a society. We're having to do things that we didn't have to do before, as opposed to the earlier traumas that we had. What's not different is that the world goes on.
Your host of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. I am here with our producer, Daniel Sagona, and our guest, Mr. Fred Dent. Fred, welcome to the show.
Hi.
So, Fred, you are principal at Dent Wealth Advisors here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Tell us what Dent Wealth Advisors does.
Dent Wealth Advisors is a fee-only fiduciary financial planning firm. That's a lot of words just to say that we help our clients manage their wealth and align their money with their values, the things that are important to them.
Right. And you have been doing that how long here in Baton Rouge?
I've been in the investment business for 32 years, on and off in Baton Rouge. I started in New York, and for 8 years I lived in Washington, D.C., but the bulk of my career has been spent here in Baton Rouge.
Yeah. So, when we started this podcast, I always had you in mind to get on the show as a guest, but I kind of accelerated that invite with the happenings and goings on in the market. And I just wanted to start and talk a little bit about what's going on in the market and kind of talk about your thoughts on how it relates to past negative movements in the market back from 87 through 99, the dot-com bust and 9/11, and then the mortgage meltdown in 08, and maybe kind of talk about how those may differ or be similar to what we're experiencing right now. Before we get into your particular entrepreneurial journey. So first off, what's going through your mind as it relates to the market today? We've seen, dramatic sell-offs, the market go into a correction and beyond, but it seems a little hysterical at times. So, curious of your thoughts on the current market conditions.
If you're listening to this podcast right now, just know that we're recording this on a day where the market has been experiencing tremendous volatility. And there's a lot of fear. I think people are beginning to clamp up a little bit, not only walking around in Walmart like I was this morning, getting some last minute preparations, but also in talking with clients. I mean, the concern is high. We don't know how this is going to unfold. And the market is responding in kind. It doesn't like uncertainty. And also clarify that when we say the market, we're talking about the stock market, meaning that market of businesses whose shares are publicly traded, typically measured by the S&P 500 stock index or the Dow Jones Industrial Average. That's the most frequently mentioned. But it ultimately is a host of businesses like Amazon, like Facebook, like Johnson & Johnson, like Medtronic, like Philip Morris. These are businesses that are solving human problems and needs all around the world. And with this uncertainty comes an uncertainty in their future and the share price. But I would recommend that everybody keep in mind that it is temporary. It will pass.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So if you go back just to and none of this is intended to be political, but just as a mile marker. If you go back to the start of the Trump administration, I attend banking conferences, and they had what the bankers called the Trump bump, which was specifically about a 20% uptick in bank stocks, in particular, right around his nomination. But we've seen a very strong growth in the market over the last 3 years. Your thoughts on the market prior to this current coronavirus situation?
Well, let me back up and just say first off that it is always a big mistake to link politics with market performance. Our current president likes to, at least up until this point, had been taking credit for the market. And now, because of that, that claim is beginning to maybe regret that. There is no strong correlation with market performance, Republicans versus Democrats, et cetera. So what I think people typically do is that they watch their own political channel and then they project all of their feelings and opinions onto the market based on their political lens. And that's a big mistake. Ultimately, the prices of the businesses in the market are based on the company's earnings, and no politician can really control that.
So what is your take on the upswing in the market over the last few years, or where would you take that back? I mean, the bull market, started about 11 years ago as it was rebounding from the '08 recession. Was it just the country getting back to work, or anything fundamentally significant that
if you think back to that time, Andrew, you'll remember that it was a very, very difficult time economically. The housing crisis, banks in severe trauma, and people were having a similar kind of fear, except it went on a lot longer. We don't know how long this current trauma is going to last. And then when that ended, March 13th or something like that of 2009, nobody rang a bell, by the way, at the bottom of the market, but all of a sudden it just turned. And the advance that we have seen since then, and people forget this, 2 years ago, we had a 20% decline in the market.
Really?
Yes. Our memories are very short in the market.
Right.
We had a bear market 2 years ago. The S&P 500 declined by almost 20%. And so that period was not much different from any other period in market history.
Right. Let me move on to this question. And if you go back to '87, which was Black Monday, there are these 4 or 5 memorable events that took on names, right, for one reason or another. That is the event in which the market was down like 22.5% in one day. Right.
Yeah, and the date has a specific recognition for me. That happened to be my very first day on the job in the investment business. So just backing up a little bit, I graduated from LSU.
Right.
I moved to Manhattan. I had $12 to my name, literally. I also had a $2,000 American Express bill coming due from my previous summer, my last semester that I did at LSU in Paris. I had to get a job. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but at the time the stock market was booming. And through sheer persistence, and I want to come back to persistence maybe at another point in this podcast for the entrepreneur who may be facing some challenges, because that's a magic elixir that can get you what you want out of life. But through sheer persistence, I landed a job with a major firm in Manhattan. And my first day, October 19th, 1987, was that day where the market dropped by 22 point whatever it is that you mentioned percent. I was fortunate in many ways because I didn't have clients' money invested. I didn't really know anything. I was enrolling in a trainee program, but I saw several things that happened at that time. Number one is I had a manager in my office who was standing out on the floor and yelling, "Get on the phone with your clients, get on the phone with your clients." And everybody, that was all of the brokers there, were on the phone with their clients saying, "The market's falling. We don't know why. We're here. We've got our eye on your money. We're not doing anything. We're holding tight."
Right.
And that taught me a lesson, because when 9/11 came along and that second plane went into the World Trade Center, and we knew it wasn't just a little Cessna, we knew something was up, we immediately got on the phone with our clients, and there was nothing we could do but just to let them know that we were there.
Yeah. So you go back to '87. It's your first day, right? I mean, when you went home that night, you must have been in like, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into here?
Well,
I mean, so this is before the internet, right? This is this is, you go back to the images of the stocks being traded on the floor and orders being yelled at. And I mean, that was the scene, right?
yeah, it was. And we also had a little machine that looked like a green TV called a Quotron, where you could type in on the keyboard the symbol of your stock that you wanted to follow, and you could get a price on it right there. But that was about as fancy as it got. But I did notice, and this is the thing that left a lasting impression on me, and that is there were basically two types of people, or two groups of people, that were responding to this dramatic decline. First of all, you could feel the tension in the air. It was palpable, and people were very concerned. There was a large group of people that was freaking out and selling out. A lot of people did that. But there was another group of people that I noticed that had their head in the game. They were focused. They had their head down. They were looking for opportunity. They had a plan in place that was formulated and implemented before the decline. And all they did was fall back on the plan and just stayed the course. Maybe they took advantage of opportunity, or at least they just held tight, but they didn't sell. Well, 6 months later, the market had fully recovered that decline. Those who sold out, who knows what happened to them, but those who held on did just fine going forward.
Yeah. Now, in '87, that Black Monday is the event that prompted the start of the trade curbing of the circuit breakers.
That's correct.
And so, do you know if the breaks that will put the halt on the market, like if it's down 5%? I don't know these numbers.
I'll tell you how it works. Originally, the circuit breakers were based on a point drop. So if the market dropped by 500 points, the circuit breakers would go in. But over time, as the market grew and grew, 500 points became less significant as a percentage of drop. So somewhere in the 90s, they converted it to a percentage drop. So the first circuit breaker says that if the S&P 500 drops by 7% or more, trading is shut down for 15 minutes. And it's essentially just putting a break and saying, okay, everybody cool down. But you're really not saying everybody cool down. It's saying every machine and program trading and computer that's executing trades needs to be stopped for a little while, because that's the major driver of the market. Then the market reopens after 15 minutes. Later in the day, if it drops by more than 13%, the second circuit breaker goes into effect. And again, trading is halted for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, trading resumes. If the market goes down by 20% or more in one day, trading is halted for the day.
I see.
And so we've had, I believe, if I'm doing this right as of this recording, 2 7% circuit breakers executed, one of them being today.
And did we not have one last week as well?
This is the second one, I think.
Yeah. So, okay. So do you think that there's any reason to suggest that in your mind that those circuit breakers should change in any way? I'm just curious if you had any.
I have no opinion on the circuit breakers. They're okay. Again, I think it's just a brief little pause. It's only for 15 minutes. I don't think it matters a big hill of beans either way.
Yeah.
It's like driving down the interstate. If you tap on your brakes, but then you accelerate, you're still going the same speed.
Right.
And you're going to reach your destination at the same time.
Right. So what do you tell your investors? And I know you have a lot of sophisticated investors that can have enough experience over the years to know that the market will go down and it will one day return, and those investors are less likely to panic, right? But, things seem to be, constantly changing as well. And then you have different investors at different points in their lives, and they may be uncertain, and they do get very fearful and want to protect themselves.
Yeah, it's normal. It's normal to feel afraid and concerned when you see such a dramatic drop in the market. I don't care how sophisticated you are. You could have the highest professional designation, manage billions of dollars. when the market does this, you're affected. We're human beings. And the biggest curse that we have in investing is we always want to say, this time is different. And so there are probably some people listening to this right now thinking about the coronavirus. This time is different. The world's going to end. Well, the coronavirus is novel. It's new in our experience as a society. We're having to do things that we didn't have to do before, as opposed to the earlier traumas that we had. What's not different is that the world goes on. It does recover. Human beings will have the same emotions, fear and greed and opportunity, all of those things. And that's the one constant in the market.
Yeah, when I was thinking earlier, I lost my thought there. We were talking about the coronavirus situation, and I wanted to try to connect it back to some of these previous events in which, if you look at the underlying fundamentals of our economy right now, I mean, they're strong, and they have been strong, and I personally believe they're on the way to getting stronger as some trade agreements come into play, and I think we had some more upward movement, if not in the stock market, just in the strength of the company in the country and manufacturing, et cetera. But if you go back to the previous crisis in '08, that was not the case. We really had some critical flaws in our economy. There was this, false sense of growth that was not real, right? In the mortgage industry in particular, and of course we discovered a critical flaw in that whole industry, which became global in reach. And so I was just curious, like, as this situation relates to, say, '08, what are your thoughts as it relates to the underlying strength of the market and the potential for a V recovery? Or I know you're not an economic forecaster, but it makes me feel that it's much better to go into this type of situation coming off of a strong economy than vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, and it is different in that structurally you're right in that we had a strong market going in. We've had this massive storm hit. China is about 2 months ahead of us in the cycle. They're already recovering. They're already ramping up their manufacturing. They're on the other side of it. Mm-hmm. We're 2 months behind them or so. And again, I'm not an epidemiologist. I don't know what the track of this is going to be, but it will end. And the underlying strength is there. But don't be mistaken. This is not just a tap on the brakes for the economy. This is slamming on the brakes for the economy. Restaurants, public venues, our own behavior. Now, counter to that, you do have some industries that are doing well. There are 10 stocks in the S&P 500 that are up on all of this, like Netflix or things that have to do with the goods and the services that we consume while we're at home.
Right. Grubhub and Waiter and
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so when you consider that then to 9/11, you talk about putting the brakes or tapping the brakes, and this is a complete shutdown. So in 9/11, we had a really hard slam on the brakes, right? I am of the mind that this is significantly harder because of what you suggested. In 9/11, I flew 4 days after 9/11. I was the only person on a large jet flying halfway across the country.
Did they let you lie down?
Not only did I have my own row, I had my own plane, right? Well, coincidentally enough, I flew this morning. And
how many people were on the plane this morning?
There was about 18.
All right.
Yeah. On a flight from Austin to New Orleans, it normally would have been nearly full. So when you consider 9/11, what we saw was travel stop, flight stops, hotels, the whole hospitality industry come to a halt, among many other things. But this appears to be a hard break almost across the board.
It's a heartbreak across the board, but what we know about this that we didn't know about 9/11, we know it's going to end. It's like we're in the middle of a severe winter storm.
Right.
We're in our houses, we're locked up, we're bundled up, we have electricity, we have heat, we have internet, we have communications. God willing, we have enough food, provisions, etc. And we're huddled up, and hopefully we're with our loved ones, and we're in communication and doing maybe some of those things that we've been procrastinating around. But we know that given a few months, the snow's going to melt, the birds will start chirping a little bit, the roads will clear, and there will be sunshine again. That we know. But at 9/11, if you think back to that time, we knew that we were in a whole new world, and the confusion factor in terms of how things would go was much more uncertain than it is now.
Well, we were under attack at 9/11, right?
Correct.
And so that had never happened on our soil before. And so the fear factor was tremendous. Well, of course, and we didn't know where that would end. And like you suggested, we can at least assume when this current situation might end. We don't know, what it will look like or for quite how long, but we're doing the right things. Flattening the curve is like, it's real and it's huge. And I think we're obviously all going to be better off for it, but it's very different, like you're suggesting, than 9/11. So interesting, the comparing and contrasting these different scenarios. But why don't we pause right there for a break from our sponsor, and we will be right back. MBD Maintenance is a proud sponsor for the Next Entrepreneur podcast, and we greatly appreciate their support. MBD Maintenance is a commercial building and maintenance contractor. They will build your commercial building, maintain it. They do additions, remodeling, tenant improvements. If you need MBD Maintenance for your commercial building needs, you can find them online at mbdmaintenance.com. Okay, and we are back with Fred Dent, the principal of Dent Wealth Advisors here in Baton Rouge. And we are talking about the markets, present and past. And Fred, I want to get your take on like opportunities that you sense that may be ahead with a market turn down. It seems as if there will be a point in which our country starts to see coronavirus cases begin to taper off and then taper down. And I sense that that's going to be game-changing for the market. And I was curious what you may think of if I think of some of our audience and young budding entrepreneurs and some who may be looking for that right time to get in the market. And what words of wisdom would you give to a young investor at this point?
Well, let me back up in history. The Arab oil embargo of 1973 and 74, when the market dropped dramatically. This is ancient history for many of our listeners. But in that year, I believe Apple was formed. In that year of turmoil and uncertainty, Southwest Airlines was born. And I told my 27-year-old son who lives in Austin, Texas, this morning on the phone that there are people right now who are coming up with innovative ideas that are born of this crisis that will transform our lives in the future. What they are, who knows? But somewhere, somehow, somebody is creating a new product or service that is directly related to what's going on right now that will enhance our lives in the future. This is the beauty and the dynamism of the American economy and innovation and entrepreneurship. And so if a listener in this podcast is an entrepreneur, now's the time to be creative and ask yourself more powerful questions like, what do people need right now? What is it that I can do that satisfies a human need and desire? How can I brainstorm this idea with trusted people to get it off the ground? Ask yourself more empowering questions like that rather than, assuming that you've taken care of your loved ones and you're washing your hands and you're isolating and everything, other than doing the temporary protections. Pay attention to what's going on and watch human behavior. Watch maybe some inefficiencies that are out there that that really weren't accentuated prior to this kind of trauma, and say, there's an opportunity.
Right.
The question I ask myself every morning when I'm getting dressed is, how can I be of service today? And I mean that both in a business sense, in a personal sense to the people I care about, but also maybe to the stranger on the street. How can I be of service? And if you can be of service and create a benefit to society or to your loved ones, you will always have solid relationships, money coming in. You're going to be fine.
Yeah. Where does that come from, Fred?
Personally, I think I had my dad was always a person who extended himself and helped other people. And so I learned it from him, but it's also born of observation in my own life and just watching people who are generous of spirit and innovative and pay attention and are attuned. They almost like have an intuition of what to do. And by doing those things, it just yields so much more than being a negative person.
Right. Yeah.
And hiding out and isolating and playing video games.
Right. Yeah, it seems that that not everyone thinks that way. That there's a certain group of individuals, and I think that age and wisdom and experience is important factors in that they're looking beyond just the growth of their business. And in fact, it seems to be a fairly common thread with the guests on our podcast, which is no surprise. I think being successful in business is not necessarily just because you're good at business, but because you care, and not just about your business or your clients, but in general. So,
well, who wants to be like Mr. Burns on The Simpsons? I mean, that guy's a caricature of greediness, and you wouldn't want to trade places with him for all the money in the world. But you might want to be like an entrepreneur that you respect and admire, who has a whole complexion of ways of looking at the world, who is generous and recognizes that living is an act of reciprocity. Like the Beatles said, in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so look, why don't we talk about your journey? And, you mentioned graduating from LSU, and your first day on Wall Street was October 19th, 87, better known as Black Monday. So why don't you take us a little bit through your early years in the market that led you up to starting Dent Wealth Advisors?
Let me back up a little bit further. One of the things, even though I've been doing this for 32 years, some of my friends who know me know that I waited on tables for 12 years. When I was 11 years old, I went to Mike Anderson's College Town Seafood Restaurant, and I said, I want to come work for you. And he said, well, I'm not hiring. And I said, that's all right. And I grabbed a mop and I started mopping the floor. And after a couple of days, he said, look, okay, you can keep mopping. I'm going to pay you $1 an hour. And my friend David Wall and I ended up working there 12 hours a day during the summer, from 9 a.m. in the morning to 9 p.m. at night, bussing tables, cleaning the crawfish pots, boiling crawfish, washing dishes, the whole deal. That laid a beautiful foundation for me. And then I also waited on tables at Ralph and Cacoo's for 4 years, Chalet Brant, which is no longer around, a fine dining restaurant, for 4 years.
Oh, yeah.
And this was all before I went to Wall Street in 1987. So it really takes a work ethic if you want to be successful, to just get up every day and say, I'm going to make something happen.
Right.
So you've asked me about my work experience on Wall Street. The truth of the matter is, when I started on Wall Street, I didn't know much about investing. Sure. I did not come from a family where stocks and bonds were owned. My dad was an insurance salesman at the time. He later became the banking commissioner, and then was also a politician. But I didn't know a lot about that, and I had to learn by watching and doing. What I noticed as the years went on, and I built a good big book of business, but I got involved in a program called the Chartered Financial Analyst Program,
Right.
which is the CFA program. And that taught me how to look at things from the other side, from the customer side, from the client side, from the analytical side, and do something more holistic than just selling stocks and bonds, which I did quite well. I still have some of those clients, by the way, from 32 years ago. They are still my clients today.
That's fantastic. So what years did you start the CFA program?
I finished it in 1999. It's a 3-year program. It took me 4 years. The average person who starts the 3-year testing, of those, if 100 people start, only 10 people finish.
Wow.
And your brother had a chartered financial analyst charter.
He did.
Yeah.
And now my nephew.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. So, that's, I know from my brother's experience, what's involved in that. And it is a very significant effort. So a great accomplishment there. So, but you would have been, that was towards the beginning of the start of your business by the time you were doing that, right?
Well, in 1999, when I did earn the CFA charter, I also broke away from the firm that I was working for, and I started my own firm called Dent Asset Management. And I've been on my own ever since. And I'll tell a brief story about that breakaway. There was something, and entrepreneurs can understand this. When I was working for another firm, they were always trying to tell me exactly how to do things their way, which is fine. And it fits certain personality types. It didn't fit mine. It wasn't that I was adversarial in any way, but I was a bit contrarian. I wanted to put my own signature on the business. And the day that I told them that I was leaving, a security guard came and escorted me out of the building. I had to grab my belongings, which is like something out of the movies. But I remember another broker at the firm where I was who said, "I wonder if Fred's going to make it on his own." And I remember hearing that thinking, you dummy, you have to show up every day and make it on your own. Just because you have a firm that you're working for doesn't guarantee your success.
Right.
So it occurred to me that as long as I'm putting in massive amounts of energy, why not do it for myself instead of somebody else?
Yeah. Daniel, isn't it interesting as we sit here and listen to our guests, the common thread that is, where maybe didn't quite fit in, with the company they were working for, and ultimately led to their exit and the start of their business. But I mean, of course, that's the experience. But I love hearing it over and over again. So, so you started Dent Asset Management then in Baton Rouge.
In Baton Rouge, yeah.
So walk an entrepreneur through that process. I mean, how do you start, and how do you build a book of business to where you can, create some revenue and pay the bills? And how slow of a start is that, and how much work is involved in that?
Well, for us, it was a lot of work. First, we're in a highly regulated industry. So there was a licensing issue. I had to transfer my license. I had to take a test very quickly to get registered as a branch manager within the system that I entered. And then you've got to go out and form an LLC. Well, you can pretty much do that online now, no big deal, but I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to set up accounting. I didn't know how to do any of that. It's much easier today because of technology to do that. You can almost just go online and do it in a day.
Right.
But it took longer then. And then when I left my prior firm, there was concern that my clients wouldn't come with me, and I legally could not contact them before I left. But when I left and I got on the phone, all but one came with me, and that was very, very fulfilling.
Well, that explains how you can start, right? I mean,
yeah, I didn't have to go out and, my clients came with me, so the revenues just jumped from the old firm to me.
So what was your vision when you started? What kind of firm did you want to build? What did you want Dent Wealth Advisors to be or to become?
Well, at the time, I just wanted to get out from the other company. I really didn't have much of a vision. But over the years, the vision has evolved. And so today, prior to this decline, we have about $250 million of assets under management for our clients. We are what is known as a fee-only fiduciary. And a fiduciary is different from a broker for a brokerage firm. People who call themselves financial advisors these days, if you scratch beneath the surface, you'll find out that they're either selling annuities or, you ever get these invitations to these fancy steak dinners, typically annuities and products, or they work for a brokerage firm. They are not held to the fiduciary standard, which means that they have to put the client's interests before theirs. We are what are known as we are a registered investment advisor, and we are held to the fiduciary standard. And our only source of revenue is the fee that a client pays us. We don't get anything like trips to Hawaii. Nobody incentivizes us to do something contrary to the client's interest.
So what did it look like on day one as far as your team? How do you open the doors? Is it Fred Dent, period?
It was Fred Dent and Rhonda Bruyette, who's still with me today. We've been together. She's been my associate for 32 years, or almost 30 years.
So she came over with you?
She came over with me. I went to Rhonda and I said, here's what I'm doing. Would you join me? And at the time, she was also servicing two other brokers in the office, I believe. And she said, I'll come with you. And I remember her father, who's now deceased, told me, he said, yeah, Rhonda came to me and asked me if I should make this move with you. And I told her to do it because I think you're a good man. Wow. And when he told me that, I thought, oh my God,
the pressure.
That's a lot of pressure. But to this day, Rhonda and I are like, we're glued to the hip. And
well, it was quite a leap of faith for her if she's, had three brokers work for her and then just to take that down to your work.
Well, yeah, getting back to the pressure, that's one of the things that kept me performing. But also, there's a sense of exhilaration. When I went into my office that first morning, and I'd rented some space over at the LWCC building, I bought some furniture over the weekend. I moved it in. But Monday morning, on the first day of business, I sat down and I got in touch with my clients. From that moment on, I have never looked back. It has been pure exhilaration from day one. And it energizes you. You show up early, you stay late, you work twice as hard, and you don't feel exhausted as a result of it. I don't know about if this happens to you. If you have a day where you're just putzing around and doing nothing and kind of procrastinating and not being very productive, do you feel more exhausted at the end of the day than if you just put in a full day of hard work?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I never felt tired. I loved it. And still to this day, I show up every day fresh and I go 100%.
How frequently do you think of that broker's comment, I wonder if Dent will make it?
At least once a month.
So you can thank him.
Well, no, I was already on my way out, but I see him from time to time. And look, he's done fine on his own.
Sure.
But it just really delineates the entrepreneur mindset and the creator mindset versus the employee mindset. It takes creative energy to be an entrepreneur. It takes something that you're really not taught in school unless you take a course in entrepreneurship. And even then, they're just giving you examples of entrepreneurship. It has to require that burning desire deep inside to just push on and do something and see the world slightly different.
So how long did it take before you were able to expand your staff beyond you and Rhonda?
In a couple of years, a young man walked into my office from LSU, and his name was Zahir Poptani, and he was from England. We had a conversation, and within a few minutes, I said, I want this guy to join me. Yeah. And I made him an offer right there on the spot. He was a PhD candidate in political science at LSU, later got an MBA, and has a law degree from England, and has a math background. So he's a brilliant guy. And we've also been together ever since. I make these guys my partners. So I helped Zahir sponsor him for citizenship. He's now a United States citizen. Later, Maui Tachi, who is from Ghana in Africa, came along, and we hired him and sponsored his citizenship. And he's one of the shining stars of our company also. So it's just an evolutionary process.
Yeah, that's interesting. It seems like you have an interesting format there. And we will take a break right now to hear a word from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back. GearTrain is a national testing, inspection, and audit company that works in the e-commerce fulfillment industry. So these guys provide the quarterly and annual inspections, preventive maintenance inspections, and they do testing and audits of conveyor systems and automated equipment in big distribution facilities. They support the entrepreneur's journey, and we're proud to have them as a sponsor. You can find Gear Train online at geartrainperforms.com. And we are back with the Next Entrepreneur Podcast. We're here with Fred Dent, principal of Dent Wealth Advisors here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So, Fred, you've got your business going at this point, and but you've pretty much stayed a four-man firm for the duration.
We have been,
Yeah,
and we'll grow as necessary. We'll add people on as we expand our client base.
So I was curious what type culture that you have created there at Dent Wealth.
One of the things that I love about our firm is that I and my three colleagues, we like each other. They like each other. It's all good. And I might add that I pay them well. They share in the largesse of the firm, so they are incentivized. That's the one reason that there's virtually no turnover.
Right.
There's no reason to leave. It is a firm that just has our head in the game, looking out for the client's best interest. And for example, with this most recent market volatility, we've called our clients long in advance of them having to call us and say, "Oh, I'm worried." We're calling them proactively before any of this happens, so that they know that we're looking after their best interest. And it's just we're lucky. We pinch ourselves every day.
Yeah, I wasn't really thinking about that when I mentioned your 4 employees, but you literally have zero turnover, and that, I mean, that's saying a lot there. I mean,
there's no reason to leave.
Yeah,
and that, a lot of entrepreneurs, and I see a lot of businesses that have high turnover, and it's because at the margin they're shortchanging their employees in some way, where they're just trying to cut corners and things like that, and the employee knows it.
Right.
What I telegraph to my colleagues is we're all in this together, and our fortunes will rise or fall together. And that alignment and common incentives, or aligned incentives, has made all the difference.
Yeah. Well, you left a Wall Street firm to start your own business, and you did that for some specific reasons, right? And I suspect what you're doing is making sure that those reasons don't exist in your firm, and therefore, your associates don't have those billed as reasons for them to want to leave as well.
That's correct. Again, we make it so that why would they leave?
Yeah. Okay. So
and to use another metaphor, we want our pasture to remain green.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so philosophy on client development. Just curious.
It's a program of attraction rather than promotion. We do mild marketing. We do some spots on NPR. I'm on podcasts like this. People know about me. I'm on TV from time to time. And client introductions. When somebody says, "Who takes care of you?" to one of our clients, and they say our name and they call us, that's the best business.
Yeah.
I've never brought in one client from any form of advertising. I've never brought in a client from any kind of marketing effort. I do those things on a very low-key basis to keep my name out there, so that when a client is introduced to us, that they know who we are in advance. But there's nobody picks up the phone and says, "Hey, I saw your ad in the newspaper."
Right. Tell us about persistence.
Well, this is a great story. We talked earlier about my first day on the job. What I didn't say is the persistence that it took for me to get a job on Wall Street. You're looking at a guy who had just a basic degree from LSU.
Right.
It took me 7 years to graduate. My GPA was just below 3%, 3.0. So I wasn't anything exceptional. But I knew how to sell. I knew how to relate to people from the restaurant business. So when I moved up to New York, my interview with the firm that eventually hired me, I went up to the lobby. I had a resume in my hand, and I said, "Hi, I'd like to speak with the manager, please." "Well, he's busy right now. Can't see you. Just leave your resume." And I said, "Okay, well, do you mind if I wait?" "Well, he's going to be busy for a while." And I was clearly getting the cold shoulder.
Right.
Drop your resume off. We'll call you. Don't call us. And I said, that's okay, ma'am. I'll just sit out here with my resume and sit in the waiting room. And when the manager's free, I'll see him. And she said, well, you might be waiting a while. I said, that's fine. And I sat there for an hour or two. Nobody came out. Nothing happened. They closed the business for the day. She said, why don't you just go ahead and leave your resume here? I said, thank you. I'll be back tomorrow with my resume, and I'll wait until the manager can see me. And went back the next day, sat out in the lobby for a couple of hours, got the same response, leave your resume. Finally, someone came out. They sent some underling out from the back who said, okay, I'll see you. And he brought me back. We sat in his office. We talked for about 20 minutes, and I guess I sold myself to that guy, because then he ran into the manager's office and said, you got to talk to this guy. The manager talked to me. I was hired. And the rest is everything that I've told you today on this podcast. That is a story of persistence, because what I find today is that a lot of young people who are looking for a job, I've sent out 30 resumes. No, you're never going to get seen or heard. I mean, maybe you'll get lucky, like getting lucky winning the lottery.
Right.
You've got to be persistent, because that's the only thing that's going to get you through that door. Pleasant, never adversarial or confrontational, but always just pleasantly moving forward and being confident, even if you're faking it until you make it, being confident moving forward. So I told this story recently to a young man who I'm mentoring, who wanted to get into the construction business with this large construction firm. And he was in my office, and I told him the story, and he kept hitting walls with this firm that he was trying to get an interview with. He left my office after he heard that story. He walked over there and just cold called and sat in the lobby. They eventually saw him. They just made him an offer.
Unbelievable.
That's all it takes.
Yeah.
But if you turn and run at the first negative little vibe you get,
Right.
you'll never make it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bold statement when a potential employer sees that you mean business and you mean for them to hire you, and you're not going to give up until they do.
You've got to interrupt their pattern, because if you put it in the employers, from their employer's perspective, they get hit by people with resumes looking for jobs all the time. Nah. Just like I get phone calls every day from salespeople saying the exact same thing over and over again. And it's almost like they're reading off the same script, and they'll never get through to me on my phone.
Yeah.
But if somebody would call me and say, Fred Dent, I saw you riding a wild tortoise across Ford's farm the other day. What were you doing? I'd say, what? You know, they would interrupt my pattern, and I'd say, well, at least you're unique. I mean, come on in. There's a guy who actually mailed me some pizzas from Chicago the other day. And I said, okay, you got an appointment because you sent me Chicago pizza. I don't even eat pizza, but at least he was creative. And that you have to interrupt people's patterns and expectations.
Yeah. So that's good stuff. So I'm curious what you are passionate about.
That's a question I ask a lot of other people, and I like it when it's turned on me. I am passionate now about living. I'm passionate and grateful that I've been granted, by whom I still wonder. Yeah. But I have consciousness, and I'm alive, and I'm healthy. So really, I'm passionate about gratitude, living in the moment, enjoying life. That's about it. And serving people, I guess.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Well, Fred, it has been a pleasure talking with you. We appreciate your insight into the current market conditions. Again, this is being recorded on Monday, March the 16th, in which we've had a down market. And not that any of us are particularly overly worried about that, but just timely to talk with someone like yourself with that in-depth knowledge. And we appreciate your feedback on that, and I appreciate you joining us. So thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
So as you can tell, Fred is a very charismatic guy. He's an articulate speaker, and he's very good at organizing his thoughts and presenting them very clearly, even on the fly. Pleasure to talk to, and I consider Fred a good friend. I think the message that we can take from Fred most today is that of persistence. It impacted the start of his career as he was just going into the workforce, and now he's using that message as he mentors young people entering the workforce themselves. So Fred can be found at dentwealth.com if you'd like to reach out to him. The Next Entrepreneur can be found on iHeartRadio, Apple Music, Spotify, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast platform. You can also follow us on our YouTube channel and on Facebook. You can reach Propel Productions at propelyourstory.com. Our producer today is Daniel Segona.